Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to this session of the Economy and Development Select Committee. Can I welcome all our observers this morning? Can I welcome particularly Deborah Perkin from the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority. Deborah's come to observe our scrutiny session this morning. Hopefully you'll be able to take some elements of best practice back to the National Park. Obviously there's quite a few of us here this morning. Before we go into the agenda items as listed, if we just could go around and give a brief introduction. So I'm Councillor Paul Pavia and I'm chair of this committee.
Paula Harris, scrutiny.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Dave Loader, Central Finance.
Kelly Byrne, Deputy Chief Executive.
Kath Fallon, Head of Enterprise and Community Development.
Martin Davis, Planning Policy Manager.
Mark Hand, Head of Planning, Housing and Place Shaping.
Matt Feakins, Member for Monmouth.
Richard Roden, Member for Monmouth.
Alan Davis, Member for Green Lane, Caldecott.
David Davies, Member for St King's Mouth Ward, Chepstow.
Brian Strong, Member for Usk.
Jez Becker, Member for St Mary's in Chepstow.
Okay.
Councillor Val Smith, Clanbaddock Ward, observing.
Councillor Roger Harris, Christollen Ward, Abergavenny, observing.
Okay, thanks very much. So item number 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Richard?
None received, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations members would like to draw my attention to at this stage? If there are, obviously raise them at the item point, and the relevant paperwork is on your desk in front of you. Item 3, to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. So you see that our previous meeting was Thursday the 30th of November. Members happy to move it on block? Thank you, Councillor Davis. Is there a seconder? Councillor Feakins, all agreed? Yeah, thank you very much. Item 4 then is the public open forum. I don't believe there's anyone here to take that opportunity up this morning. So agenda item 5 is the Revenue and Capital Monitoring 2017-18 Outturn Statement Period 2. And I think Dave Loader. Sorry, David. David's going to present that. Yeah. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So I'm here to present the Month 7 Revenue and Capital Outturn Report. It was reported to Cabinet on the 10th of January. So it provides an outturn position for the authority based on actuals and committed spend up to the end of October. It's quite a long report, so I'll provide a brief summary, and we will be happy to answer any questions you have at the end. So the headline outturn position is a net overspend of £62,000. This is made up of an overspend on our net cost of services of 1.333 million, offset by a 1.271 million underspend in finance and treasury. This is a £102,000 improvement on what we reported at month 2. So I'd like to draw your attention to section 2 of the report. This runs through the recommendations that went to Cabinet. There's 6 points there. I won't read them out, but obviously the first one is that obviously members consider the overspend of 62,000. The Cabinet required chief officers to continue to work to reduce the 1.33 million overspend. Members consider the forecast capital outturn report, and obviously take into account the levels of slippage and capital receipts. Members note the low level of earmarked reserves. 2.5, members note the a significant and continued forecast reduction in the school's balances. And the last one is that members note that the overspend on services could have a recurrent impact on our budget setting proposals for 18-19. So if I can draw your attention to section 3, this provides a revenue monitoring statement, and this highlights each directorate's performance and shows how the £62,000 overspend is broken down. There's a paragraph in that I'd like to draw your attention to, which is 3.1.4. That paragraph highlights some of the changes that have happened in the structure since month 2. It reflects movements in chief officers' portfolios since the senior officer restructure that we had earlier on in the year. There's also a few lines in that paragraph as well that refers to some anticipated reserve requests. These haven't yet been approved, but if they were approved by members, the overspend would turn into a £78,000 underspend. So if I take you to the services that are covered by this select committee, that's paragraph 3.1.8 on page 7. So obviously gives us the outturn position for the services that fall under this committee. You'll see that the portfolio is reporting a £527,000 net overspend. Out of the 5 areas under this committee, 4 are overspending. So business growth and enterprise anticipates a 230,000 overspend, planning and housing 55,000 overspend, tourism, leisure and culture 189,000 underspend, governance, democracy and support 61,000 overspend, and then we see a £7,000 underspend in public protection. Obviously there's a brief description for the main causes of this, but there are more details on the spreadsheets that accompany the report. Kelly has provided a director's commentary. From that you'll see that this area is affected by reserve movements, and when we take these into account, the overspend is reduced down to 272,000. Moving on to section 3.2, this provides a summary of the budget savings progress. Of the 5.308 million savings built into our 17-18 budget, 4.965 million has been found, 265,000 is unachievable, and £79,000 delayed. It's anticipated all the savings that's built into the services within this portfolio will be achieved. There are further details provided in Appendix 1 for the savings. Section 3.3, we move on to capital and shows the capital outturn position. We're showing a £71,000 underspend on the programme overall. This takes into account £6.289 million worth of slippage. Again, the schemes that fall under this portfolio are actually underspending by 51,000. That relates to the solar farm, the construction of that underspent. The slippage that's included in this area also relates to the solar farm. The £458,000 relates to retention payments that are going to be occurring in future years. So running down through section 3.5 runs through the financing mechanisms expected to fund the capital spend profile that has been forecast in month 7, and the table below in 3.6 provides us with a breakdown of the expected capital receipts activity for the year. And then right at the bottom, the final section 3.7 gives us a rundown of the expected reserve usage for the year. At month 7, it is anticipated that all approved reserves will be fully utilised this year. And then we also have the separate section at the bottom that details the school's reserves position. Now that's currently forecasting a £554,000 deficit, which is an increase from what we reported in month 2. Again, in Appendix 2 there is further details of individual school balances and the recovery plan targets that have been set. So that's a brief run through. So I'll be happy to field any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Blakeborough.
I guess it's just, I'm going to focus on the Economy and Development Select Portfolio because that's the committee we're in. Just looking at page 19, 3.1.8. There is Enterprise Directorate is 534,000 overspend. I guess, first of all, just a definition of overspend within that directorate. Does that mean that we've spent too much, or does that mean we failed to generate money? So a question around that. When you're looking at business growth and enterprise, I'd like to sort of, if you could explain the purpose and desired outcomes for this directorate, because if it is to generate money and we're not generating money, it's, you know, we have got issues there. 172k result of adverse events activities. I'm assuming that is the activities and the summer activities, because my concerns around that, that's why I'm asking about the purpose and the desired outcomes, because when we looked at that, initially it was to generate money of 140,000, and actually we lost about 130,000, and then the goalposts were changed and we were told, yes, but it's a cheap way to market Monmouthshire. So it's either we're there generating money or we're there to use this money to market Monmouthshire. So questions just around that to be clear on that. And also on reflection, what could we have done differently to reduce or at least prevent this overspend? One of the rules we have here is effective budget monitoring, to make sure effective budget monitoring is taking place. So it's looking at processes that are in place. And so there's questions around where there's a lack of regular profit loss accounts for us to look at. And I think that has been an issue, particularly around the events. So we didn't even know we were losing money until the very end, and I'd like to know what's been put in place to rectify that, to change that practice. I do have a few questions around capital receipts, but I'll wait until after other people have spoken. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, Chair, I'll take these if I can. Just to be clear, if you move down to the end of paragraph 3.1.8, you will see that the directorate overspend position is not 527, it's 279, as Dave has pointed out. So there are a lot of reserve movements in my areas accounting for different pressures and different activities. And the way, because we do for the most part work on a P&L basis, the way those movements and environments have to take place. So for example, Monmouth Leisure Centre is closed to the public. We can't generate the income that we usually do there. So there is a reserve set aside to compensate for the income lost for the period that centre is closed. On the homeless leasing scheme, you'll be aware, for example, in housing, that the full subsidy payment that we received from Welsh Government to provide privately leased properties for homeless households has been withdrawn. So we do have a reserve movement coming in to cover some of that, whilst we can still generate some income in the places that we are able. So there's a couple of reserve movements that have to come in to compensate. Just to be clear about the basis upon which this directorate works. So the services that I'm responsible for are the ones that you see set out in front of you. So it's CAS section in terms of the business growth and enterprise aspect. And some of CAF's wider responsibilities, which actually sit under social care, including things like community development and partnerships, are also included in my budget areas, even though I don't have that direct responsibility over them. So some of this is about sort of presentational issues, which I think for now we've kind of left as they are till we get to the end of the year. There's the planning, housing and place shaping bit, which sits with Mark. There's the bit around tourism, leisure, culture and youth, which sits with Ian Saunders. And then in addition, which is definitely not income generating territory, is all of the governance, democracy, support, legal services, democratic services. So it's quite a mixed bag. So some of it has an absolute explicit aim around enterprise development and income generation, but some of it doesn't. Some of it doesn't share that same end point. So it's a mixed bag of services, and you'll see from the progress that we've made over the last 7-8 years, this area has traditionally been hit with the highest amount in terms of efficiency savings and income generation. And every day of the week, this service area generates income because lots of the services that we run and operate are commercial. They have to operate in a market space. They're very much in a competitive environment. Now, the areas of pressure that I've highlighted in my Chief Officer commentary are mainly around some of those income generating services. And I'm not going to labour this point too much because I think I've made it clear in probably the 3 or 4 presentations that I've done recently on the future of tourism, leisure and culture and youth services. Again, they operate very much in a market competitive context, and because some of the issues that I've outlined to you in the case for an alternative delivery model, they're not able to generate sustainable levels of income because some of the pressures and the constraints that make up the very business case for an alternative delivery model. So you'll appreciate that's where the vast majority of these pressures are emanating from. The second thing then around events, which is a very important question, does merit some consideration. And again, through some of the work the Audit Committee has done, I think there's visibility that yes, the events were meant to make money, and the major event that we put on did make us some money. It was very unfortunate that the other events that we put on to sort of sit alongside that main event lost us money. Now, the reason we lost money, and I've outlined it previously, is because of unforeseen circumstances. We didn't set out to lose money. I think I've described that because of the events surrounding the atrocity in Manchester, some of the additional investments that we had to make that were unforeseen did contribute significantly to a loss position. Equally, some mistakes that were made in the execution of those events contributed to a loss position. But what I think we've committed to, and that work is underway and led by Kath, is a very comprehensive review of that function. And don't forget that function isn't core funded by this council. It has to generate its salary. So that team's salary is included in those costs. It has to wash its face. It's not a core funded service that then generates income, which is almost a sort of artificial position. So we're reviewing that independently. We will get the results of that soon, and that will tell us whether there is a future in continuing to run commercial events in the way that we've been doing, or we may offer some alternatives. So sorry for that sort of brief canter through, but I think it's important, A, to be very clear about the areas of responsibility, what we rely on to generate income and what we don't. 2, some of the reserve movements, which bring the position down quite considerably to 279,000, which I'm pretty confident will reach a balanced position around that year end. And 3, that important and specific issue around events and why that's generating such a bulge, I suppose, in terms of the budget position that we're able to present.
Councillor Brigden.
Is it possible, and would it be a good idea, I don't know what the committee thinks, this report you're talking about, this review, and I guess you're reviewing the processes, because I want to know the detail in terms of why did we have profit loss accounts coming regularly, and what are you going to do differently? And I guess that'll come into that report, as well as knowing how many tickets we've sold, and to have an understanding whether events is going to be a money generating thing, or whether we put money in the pot and say events is about marketing membership. And I guess, could we bring that to this meeting?
Absolutely. I think, Kath, you've commissioned that review. It's underway. We're meeting with the external advisors on Tuesday of next week. So when we have a full report, we will bring it back to this committee. One of the things that I'm thinking about from a governance perspective is the future role of Audit Committee. I'd really like Audit Committee to develop their risk radar, because we did have a P&L account for events. It was monitored every day, let alone weekly. Ticket sales and all of the income you'd expect to be generated was healthy. The problem was the last minute costs that we had to meet around additional security and protection, which, was a separate issue to things like ticket sales and income generation, but it still hits the bottom line. So we're very happy to bring that review back. I think in terms of the detail of due diligence, and Councillor Feekins is a point that you've made many times, on Audit Committee we have lots of people with business insight and discipline, and I think it would be really good if they were able to develop their risk radar diligence role to help really test some of the options and evaluation that we're able to put forward around commercial events and undertakings.
Okay, Councillor Brigden.
Thanks for that. Just a little slightly concerned, because I thought we didn't know how many tickets we were selling, and we didn't have profit loss accounts, because I know this committee consistently kept asking for them and we weren't getting them. So either they were there or they weren't, and I suspect they weren't there, and it wasn't just the last minute expenses.
Yeah. We do have an accountant who specifically looks after the events area. They were monitoring it in conjunction with the events manager. You're right, we were probably looking at the figures daily, weekly, but we probably weren't supplying you guys with that information regularly enough. Ticket sales, well, again, it's all down to the events manager. We just have to wait and see what they come up with. With the ticket sales, I think there's only one main event that let us down massively, and up to 2 weeks before that main event, ticket sales were low, but were not too bad, but they just didn't progress through. So that's what caused the main issue with that one.
And I know, Councillor Blakeborough, if I'd been asked for that information, I would have certainly supplied it.
I certainly think that we would welcome that final independent review when it comes for a further look at that, because the brutal truth is we need to generate more revenue as a council, and we hope there is a commercial future in delivering events within this council. Councillor Davis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to enter into this before I ask my other couple of questions, but what we can't deny is that there's a significant loss has occurred here, and we all know that things can go wrong. The key, as I've said previously, is to learn the lessons from that. And I think one of the concerns we've all got, as far as the ADM model is concerned, is that lack of business expertise within the current structure. My personal view is that if anything isn't done to address that, then the ADM model will have very little chance of succeeding. And I see within Monmouthshire that there are huge opportunities to generate income, but it can only be done with the right management setup, the right people in place, and a plan of what is going to take place. And it's not just about events, because if you look at, I've been looking at the comparative data online, and if you look at leisure centre visits, for example, we're in the lower quartile for that. So we need to look at how we market things, but you need that experience within that new model. If we look at these results, it's quite concerning. I'm not talking about Endem, I'm talking in general now. The general economic situation is it's very important that the ADM model works and produces the right results. And I'm a little bit concerned whether the message is getting through that things have got to be done differently. And as far as I've mentioned this before, as far as accounting is concerned, as a committee member, I want to be able to look at those accounts and scrutinise them. As a manager, I'd want to do it even more, because I need to know every detail about every unit within my sphere of operation and how it's performing. And from my personal experiences, that is very difficult to do currently within the current setup. In fact, it's almost impossible, I would say, to do it. And therefore, these are the sort of things that really need to be looked at. We all make mistakes. I've made mistakes. But I think it's very easy to protect yourself and say, well, I've done it, and I've made a mistake with a bit of equipment, and I've said, well, they didn't tell me this information. But the more I thought about it afterwards was I didn't ask the right questions. I should have been asking how many people does it take to calibrate this bit of kit, and I didn't do that. And therefore, I have a response to. So it's happened. We need to learn the lessons of it, and I need to be convinced that things are not going to float on as they were before, because we really have an opportunity here if we do it properly. So I'll ask another question in a minute. So that's in relation to that. The top of page 16, I'm quite fascinated by, because I wish you could teach me how to do this. I'd have been a Chancellor of the Exchequer. There's periods 1, 2 and 3, and nearly all of them are in deficit, and then at the outturn we've got a fantastic surplus. How do How did that come about?
Reserve movements, I reckon that's what it is.
Can you teach me how to do that, please?
Sorry, what paragraph?
Top of the little table at the top of page 16.
It's 313.
313.
313. It's got period 1, 164,000 deficit, 62,000 deficit, 1.5 million deficit, 839 deficit, and then there's a surplus of 884,000.
That I think Mark Howcroft puts that table in to provide you with data as per how the authority has done in previous years when it's been reporting through the quarters. I've lost the table again.
It's a magical trick, though, isn't it? That you've got 3 quarters of deficit and then a marvellous surplus at the end of it.
Yeah, that's actually not. It's not adding up the columns. That's just saying. So if you take 16-17, period 1, we were reporting a 1.511 deficit, but in period 2, that deficit reduced to 839. In period,
So it's not an
cumulative. No, it's just.
It wasn't clear to me, so perhaps we need to look at the way that's presented then.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm still not clear, and I know other people have got questions about how we actually arrived at the surplus. My final question, it relates to the procurement, because further down this document there's a chart and it's got a traffic light signal system, and procurement is red because it says we're looking at it. Now, if I was managing this business, which I'm not, and I was in the financial position that we all know we're in, then I would be pushing that procurement as hard as I can. And I would expect that there would be I'll use the term project planner because I'm old-fashioned, that's what I used to use, a project planner, and I would expect to see targets for what each department is expected to, because it's not an optional will you, this is a you will. You know, we're approaching that stage now. So I want to see what the milestones are, what the targets are for people, and what the timescale is for completing this project. Because it seems to me that in the current situation, in any situation, you should be looking at this sort of thing anyway. But this needs to be tackled as a matter of urgency. I don't like the idea of well, we're looking at it, it's a red light. Will we still be looking at it in 12 months' time, perhaps? Thank you.
Chair, can I answer some of these?
Yep.
Yeah, if I can just go back to the point that you very eloquently described around business discipline. I think business discipline is essential, not just, that sort of commercial flair and acumen. And it's essential in this service area, but it's equally essential in social care and health. Just because they don't have to do commercial undertakings, that business discipline to drive a social mission has to be just as prevalent there. Has to be exactly the same in education. Now, it's unfortunate that we've got this one example around events, because every day of the year these services generate sustainable income. Yes, this one sticks out like a sore thumb, but we have to be mindful that these things are in context as well. Failure to generate income in a set of services that haven't had investment, where, some of the properties that we're operating from with some of the kit are in, a woeful state. It's very, very difficult. The factors are wider than just commercial acumen. There's a number of different things, especially when lots of these service areas have had to have quite significant staffing cuts as well. So, you have to take the wider factors. Sometimes as a local authority, I've said already, we can be really good at marketing some service areas and not so successful in others, not least because we've only got one person doing that. So it's a culmination of factors. And again, to reiterate around that episode around events, I was seconded out of this council for 6 months during the period in which those events took place. I'm not saying things definitely would have been different if I'd have been around, but I was securing a £511 million deal for the Cardiff Capital Region at that time. So I refuse to accept that we don't have commercial skills and discipline, because I think we do. But I absolutely take the point. We can always improve that, hone it, and we can keep learning. And I think part of some of the benefits of an alternative delivery model will be recruiting from outside, getting those fresh perspectives, making sure that we've got a board of individuals who've got that experience and that commercial acumen and flair. So I do think there are some significant opportunities. Let me just address the issue of procurement, because I think as a select committee, you've started to do some really excellent work. I think we're only still in the stage of identifying the problem. But yes, there's £100,000 which is set against the Resources Directorate as a saving in this financial year 17-18. Now, the problem with that is that that saving has been set against our procurement function, which is 2 people. Procurement in this council happens through service areas, not through those 2 people. So, as you'll be aware, we've got quite a significant gap in the work that we're doing to build a budget at the moment for the next financial year, 18-19. And one of the areas of personal responsibility that I've adopted, well, there's 2. One is transport, the second is procurement. Now, there's clearly some practice that needs addressing around procurement in terms of spot purchases. And lots of these happen in areas like transport. They happen in additional learning needs. They happen in looked after children, where, you know, sometimes we're working in such volatile, high pressure environments. It's easy to take the first cost that's given to you by a provider. You know, negotiation, commercial acumen has to come into it. There are some issues, as again you've identified as a select committee, with the National Procurement Consortium. Whereas a small council, we enter into large framework contracts that don't deliver value for money for us. So next year, we've set ourselves a target of delivering a £500,000 saving in terms of procurement. And what we're doing at the moment is all of the groundwork, due diligence, options analysis, which tells us exactly where and in what service areas we need to target that efficiency saving in the future. Because I think it's lazy practice to say, these 2 individuals, which can't influence what happens in service areas, they got to find us 100k. They'll never do it. It's got to be some of the behaviours and practices in service areas, holding people to account. So when we procure, you know, high cost goods and services, and don't forget we spend 92 million a year procuring goods and services, there has to be gatekeeping. Questions have to be asked. Why are you doing it? Do you need it? Are you just doing the same old things you have been doing? When a supplier gives you a cost, are you just accepting it? How do we know they're not adding a 0 on the end of it because we're the council? You know, so we've got quite a detailed plan of activity to target this, and I'm hopeful that with your efforts as a select committee, we can start to make some progress quite quickly, because I think poor procurement leads to poor choices and decisions in other service areas right throughout the council.
Councillor Davis, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, from the perspective of the committee, I'd like to see that plan and the timescales, the milestones. I think that's the, you know, we got to be approaching things that way. You know, put ourselves under the pressure to do it within a certain time, and what questions are being asked, what are the answers we're getting. You know, personally, when I went through a similar exercise, each department was given the target to meet, and it didn't have to be a target that was unachievable, very, very achievable, but it made people think about what they were buying, and I think that's as much as important as it is perhaps as the other thing, because people don't tend, we do get into a routine of going to the same people and not thinking about it, and I think that you need to get that mindset differently. But from a committee perspective, we need that information coming forward. Thank you.
I'd welcome that. I mean, we're only sort of 2.5 weeks in. As I say, you know, part of the other work that I'm doing is in transport, around our passenger transport unit and fleet as well. So it would be really good for me if the committee could look at all of the areas that we're looking at. There are 8 areas in total: additional learning needs, looked after children, transport, procurement. We're looking at our service optimisation, so when we open and when we close, commercialism, we're looking at automation and artificial intelligence, and we're also looking at some of the immediate commercial opportunities that we think we could yield benefit around in the next 12 to 18 months. So when that plan is ready, with all of the gateway stages, it would be really good if this committee could look at that and make sure there is scrutiny. And I think around the procurement stuff, what I had in mind was that we would have your help and engagement in actually executing some of that. So beyond just scrutinising, it would be great to have some of your support in terms of how we actually enact and deliver some of that as well.
Yeah, I think that was the expectation when we embarked on the workshop program and said we wanted to focus on a particular element that we could ensure, not only that we generated revenue, but we ensured the council made proper savings. Councillor Roden, do you want to come in this stage?
Thank you, Chair. Are there any new pressures that have arisen since this report was arisen that are likely to impact on the financial year? And second, is there anything that's unusual in this report compared to similar ones in previous years at this similar period that we should be aware of that could lead us to have concerns? Thank you.
Start, Councillor, just by explaining, I should have done it at the outset, because our position at the moment is a net overspend of about 279,000. What I've done is put a recovery plan in place. So I'm looking at every single purchase over £500 just to make sure I know what we're spending money on. All vacancies have been frozen unless there is an exceptional case. We're looking again at income levels and what we could do between now and year end. And we're just making sure that every, it's quite sad, isn't it, to go into a darkened room and look at every single line of expenditure. But, sometimes it's necessary just for you to identify trends and patterns. So Dave's helping us put that process in place and that monitoring. It's not watching people because, we do employ adults and there has to be some trust. But, equally, you can get into sort of patterns of behaviour. And I think it's healthy to have those checks and balances in place from time to time. I think in terms of budget position last year, it's broadly comparable, I think, at period 7. So, the only sort of unusual thing for me is, the normality that we get around trends in tourism, leisure and culture. Because these services, as I've set out already, are suffering in terms of investment, staffing cuts, ongoing need for income generation around this time of year, we do typically see income levels dip.
Yes. Sorry, Dave.
It's okay, thanks, Chair. Thinking about events that may have happened post this report, obviously we've had the bad snow in December. I'm talking about affecting the wider authority now. So obviously our winter maintenance costs will have increased. Again, we're constantly monitoring for those scenarios and we're looking at mitigating things in place to bring it back in, but probably the bad weather is probably sticking out as the main thing that might affect between now and year end, but we're constantly on it trying to bring it back in line.
Okay, Councillor Becker.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a car which has a lag on its parking sensors, so what I frequently hear in my car is beep, 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 crunch, beep, like that. And that's kind of how I feel about the events system at the moment. It's all very well saying we should develop our risk radar, but if the beeping isn't telling us anything's coming, if we're not getting the information in a timely manner, we can't help you. Plus also, that does sort of imply that the internal system needs to develop its risk radar to be a bit more efficient. So I'd just like to, not push back on the fact that we need to develop our risk radar. We're only as good as the information we're given. I think that as well as commercial experience, there is this idea that if we could embrace the idea that, for instance, though, that event that went wrong should have failed quicker. That should have been picked up and should have failed quicker. Or we should have been given the information quicker so that we could tell you it should fail quicker. So
I don't think it could have, and I think I said at the beginning of both outings that I've had, both very pleasant experiences at Audit Committee, that I don't think for the most part it could have. Lots of the things that occurred were unforeseen and unknown and occurred as these things were being enacted. So, for example, the car parking income, some of the stuff that happened in the process, it would have, no amount of scrutiny or looking at P&L accounts could have accounted for that happening at that time. So I completely agree with what you're saying in a sense that, you have to have that foresight, but to have foresight, you have to have the information. Absolutely point taken. But some of the things, I think, when you're running such a dynamic series of events that are crammed into sort of 5 days, it's very intense. Some of the things that happened then. And, you know, if I'd known about it, I could have done something about it on the night because I was there. But, you know, unfortunately, I didn't. And I think that was how things were unravelling, sort of moment to moment. Again, we can learn from that. But at the time, I feel quite confident that there probably wasn't anything anybody could have done. So I think it's just sort of, you know, sort of balancing all of the different factors, but absolutely agreeing foresight is everything. And that's definitely what we've got to get better at.
Okay, Councillor Feakins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kelly. For me, I have full confidence in the business acumen of your team and you and our council. I really do. I believe we did everything possible in order to mitigate the losses in that evening and for that event. And I believe that we as a council held our head up high, that we didn't cut corners at the last minute, which other operators may have well have done. And I think in the commercial world, they probably would have done. I think health and safety would have been a risk. I think there would have been many other things which we could have cut at the last minute in order to save costs. We didn't, because we are Monmouthshire County Council. So I hold my head up high that I'm a member of this council. I also think that we as a committee have to have trust in our officers, and I think that we, you know, if anything's going to be reviewed, it should be the scheme of delegation and the reporting that comes back of that scheme of delegation, because we don't want to micromanage you. If you feel as if we're micromanaging in you, you won't be able to blossom into your full potential. So I think those checks and measures need to be made clear. I personally do not want to be looking at your sales figures on a daily basis. I think that, you know, I have full confidence in you as a team to do that. I don't need to be looking at your figures on a month-to-month basis. I have full confidence in your team that you can do that. And I think as long as that reported element comes back, which is within the scheme of delegation, I have full confidence. So I just wanted to share that with you to say I think that you know, if there's anything going to be redrafted or what comes out of this, then it's simply to do with the automation of the reporting and the regularity of reporting, as opposed to specific reporting on specific instances, because I don't think we have the wherewithal or the ability to micromanage the information that you as a whole team are micromanaging on a day-to-day basis.
Councillor Baker.
I've got just a question about the capital receipts, but before then, you were mentioning the bad weather. I guess I just want to use this opportunity in terms of applauding highways, because with the weather, we never know when it's coming in. It's kind of like you're on standby, and response was very, very good. Was excellent, actually. Capital receipts. I'm just wondering where we are with the capital receipts and if we've maximised the money that we can get in. And the areas I'm looking at is the old County Hall, Coed Glass in Abergavenny, the site there, the mega buildings, and just an update on the Morrison sites and the money coming in from that. So those are 4 areas of capital receipts, and just wondering, have we maximised the amount of money coming in? Is it coming in on time? Do we need to do a bit more chasing?
Yeah, I think in terms of capital receipts generation, it's not my area of expertise, as you will tell. I think in terms of Morrison's and the other sites that we expect to generate receipts from, things are in train. I think where there is a lag, I think borrowing has been put in place. And I know at the moment we're looking at our interest rates to see if we can sustain borrowing on variable rates before we convert to sort of slightly more expensive fixed rates. So I think everything is in train. I've not been warned of any issues. And I know where we do have some slight delays, because not everything in the programme sort of goes to plan all of the time, that we have borrowing in place which we can safely accommodate within our sort of repayment limits. You will see that Morrison's is now on site and is taking shape really quickly in Abergavenny. So I think that's going to be very beneficial, both in terms of our bottom line and obviously as new provision that was promised some time ago now to the residents of Abergavenny.
Dave, did you want to say anything more on this?
Yeah, sorry, it's not really my area. That's more the technical accountancy. I think the narrative, it does mention the County Hall site in Cwmbran. It's been deferred. What I can do is ask our technical accountant maybe to provide us with a brief summary of what their thoughts are, and I can circulate it back round to this committee. Yeah, okay.
Sure, I think that was coming back as a separate report to this committee anyway, wasn't it? Progress on the sale of the County Hall site.
Yes, it was. It's something we've been chasing. I think I think there was an email circulated by Roger Hoggins a week or so ago on this. But it is something that we're looking at, and we would like a more fuller report here on that. But I think it would be helpful to have those that summary detail, which would help us on this.
Okay, I'll get a one-pager on that, Chair, and then perhaps we can schedule a time for Roger and Deb Hill-Howells to come along and to present, because that's quite a significant disposal, isn't it? Especially given what's going on in Cwmbran with the new hospital site. So that is quite significant, I think, for members to be fully cited on.
The reason I was asking about the Morrisons is because originally we were promised a certain amount of money because Morrisons is smaller, the building is smaller than the original. Whether there's change in the revenue coming into us and the sale of that land, and are we getting it in a lump sum? Is it spread over 25 years? Those kind of things.
From memory, I know there was an upfront lump sum payment made. I think the remainder comes in on completion. But perhaps when I ask Deb and Roger to drop committee members a note via you, Chair, they can add the detail about the Morrisons development, so you can see what we've banked already and what is outstanding and when that is due to come in. So we'll phase it and break it down for members to see the full detail.
Thank you very much. That would be helpful. Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to raise a point which is not about the finances, but the impact of some of the things that are going on at the moment. And in Chepstow, we have, and I guess it's because of the debate that's going on with regard to leisure centres, etc., and also the issue of the future of the school. The two are linked to one another. Now, there's a really hot rumour going around, and it must have come from internally somewhere, that the leisure centre is going to be, in quotes, sold off, and so it's with it. I've got the hospital, I've got the school, I've got the leisure centre, all in my ward. A real recipe for joy. But the point I tried to make is, while these things are going on, and they are as sensitive as they are, all staff should know that what is said is not helped by spreading rumour. You're not going to get to the right solution of things. So I'm just concerned that these are difficult and sensitive subjects. It isn't helped by a rumour coming about from, well, within us somewhere or other. It can't be from anywhere else.
I think no matter how much information you put out, Councillor Dovey, and that's a new one on me, Chepstow Leisure Centre. I wish I'd known, because we've got a 5-year business plan predicated on it. But I think you can't legislate sometimes for gossip and conjecture, unfortunately. But I agree, it's frustrating, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Can you put your microphone on? Sorry, Councillor Dovey.
I apologise. Basically, it is a simple message to staff. You don't go talking about these issues externally to members of the public, or maybe even to the press.
Thank you. I've got a question on 318 and the tourism, leisure, culture overspend. Looking at the outdoor education offer, and setting aside any decision-making processes that the Cabinet and Council will make over the next few weeks on the ADM, we've obviously had Torfaen and Blaen and Gwent withdraw from our partnership. I'm just wondering how we're remodelling, reshaping that ahead of any decision on the ADM, or are we waiting on the ADM to push that forward, and are we reaching out to other partners, not just within the region but across border as well, to neighbouring authorities across border, to try and sell this offer, particularly at Hillston Park, which is it does need a bit of additional investment. I don't deny that, but it is a great facility. I'm just wondering how we're using that to maximise additional revenue.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You're right. The £41,000 loss has been incurred as a direct result of the withdrawal from the partnership by those two local authorities. You'll be aware that Newport is now distant from the arrangement, albeit it still buys in to a certain extent. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to sort of strike a similar deal with some of those other councils. So we have known about it, and as is noted on the bottom of that paragraph there, the bottom line trading activity is unaffected because we do have quite a substantial reserve built up around our outdoor education service. It is going to take potential activation of an ADM, if indeed that's the decision council makes, to sort this out, because it will be a complete change of service model. And you're right, some of the income projections and the income pipelines, in fact, this is one of the areas where I think we stand to gain most from an alternative delivery model, is absolutely built into that business case and the business plan. And to be honest, the majority of new income that we feel that we could generate once we've looked after our own local schools is privately with different companies out there, large corporations who've already started to approach us. And I think, in terms of growth opportunities for the future, this will be undoubtedly a key one just because of the offer that we have. I think what we've done really is market it locally into schools when actually it's got much wider opportunities for growth and profit generation.
Okay. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. Do you actually market the Hilton Park to places like Birmingham, South East, places like that, to bring in children from the inner cities at all?
Yes, in England there was a government directive that all children under the age of 16 should have at least one outdoor education experience by the time they arrived at that age before they left secondary education. So we've benefited quite considerably from that policy directive. But I think at the moment it's difficult because predominantly the service and how it's constructed, how it's paid for is geared up to schools and an outdoor education experience. We're quite constrained with how we can market it to the private sector because the weeks are normally full with schools. We get some weekend slots. It's quite difficult to know where you are and to where you've got gaps to be able to market it confidently further afield. I think they do really well at the moment. They do generate sustainable sources of income, but I think there's a wide acceptance and recognition that we could probably go much further. I think maximum occupancy at the moment is sort of in the high 80%, but I think there's confidence that we could get to 98% occupancy in this area at least. Okay, any further questions at this stage? No. Okay, so just to summarise, I think we all recognise the tough financial position that we're in as a council in general, and obviously particularly since back end of Christmas and the New Year, where we've had to re-look at some of those budget proposals for the next financial year due to the pay review. In terms of the departmental figures that we're responsible for as a committee, again, I think we scrutinised some of that in detail. We've recognised the challenge of events management, and we want to ensure that this is a really important element of our revenue offer as a council going forward. And we certainly will welcome the independent review of that of last summer's events. As Councillor Davis has said, if there are lessons to be learned, let's learn them quickly and move on. In terms of the ADM, we've obviously touched on that, and it's important that there is strong commercial acumen going forward, which will again maximise our revenue potential as a council. The issue of procurement, I think we've made a good start as a committee on that work in terms of the workshops. The second workshop was held just a week or so ago. I think we would like to see a further plan then. I think the director has said that she will bring that forward as soon as that is finalised. We will look to scrutinise that in further detail here.
We've looked at some of the additional pressures, and we've been informed that it's sort of broadly comparable to last year, although, you know, the redesign is happening of those budget lines as we speak. In terms of micromanagement, I think I agree with what Councillor Fegan said, but it is important that we have that flow of information so we can scrutinise properly. And you know that does cut both ways. So you know we will ask for that information as and when we really need to see that as a committee, and I think we'll make that judgment. I think that we've covered all the points off there. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to make it clear, I wasn't suggesting that we micromanage the work of the council officers. What I was suggesting was that if I was in that position, I would need detailed information, right? And I think unless you've got that information, it's very difficult to see how you can commercially manage anything, a corner shop, let alone something as complex as this. So personally, I don't want to manage it, right? But I'm just suggesting that maybe that the people already know all this information anyway, I don't know. But it's just common sense to me that you can't manage these individual units unless you have the details of how they're performing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, officers. If we move on to then item 6, which is the presentation regarding the City Deal strategic investment proposal for Caldicot Town Centre. I know this has been circulated to members beforehand, although I think Kath is going to speak to that presentation. Are you going to kick off, Kath, or does Kelly want to say anything? No. Okay, thank you.
Really, it was an opportunity to update Economy and Development Select Committee on our activities down in Caldicot, really. We've been looking at the opportunities for Monmouthshire, particularly in terms of the abolition of the Severn Bridge tolls, which was highlighted this week in terms of the Severn Growth Summit that was held in Celtic Manor. And really to look at how we maximise our opportunities in terms of our centricity, our close proximity to our high growth border areas. And this week we've been talking about the powerhouse, the Great Western Powerhouse has raised its head again, and also we've got the Midlands Engine. And also we've got some new funding opportunities now in terms of a targeted regeneration investment programme that's been released through Welsh Government. Why Sevenside? Well, clearly it forms our largest area of urban population. Caldicot itself is sandwiched between Mega, which is a major growth settlement, and also Chepstow, which is our thriving urban area. It's well served by the motorway and the rail links, and plans for a potential new walkway at Mega Station and a most eastern point for the metro. And we feel it's likely that Caldicot's going to experience extension given these ambitions. In terms of Caldicot specifically, we've got areas of high affluence really alongside areas experiencing high deprivation, and a need for social housing as well has been identified. We've also got a high number of out commuters. Our figures are actually in terms of commuting back and forth is that there are 4,400 journeys, which is more than actually was suggested in the Welsh Government detail that was given on Monday at the Western Summit, at the Severn Growth Summit. So it's actually quite a major opportunity there, particularly in terms of the Northern Powerhouse, and it was the links between Liverpool and Manchester that brought that together. There's also, it's a main retail, leisure and administration centre for Sevenside, but it is an inward-facing town centre. It's got quite a modern architecture in comparison to Abergavenny and Chepstow and Monmouth. This contributes little to its vitality and sense of place, which leads to a disconnect from its surrounding areas. There's also an opportunity to build on the new school and the interest that would be in terms of people moving into the area. So, it's sort of certainly an area that's we think is sort of on the up. There was a visioning exercise that took place in 2014-16, which sort of really have been left in the balance. We felt there was a need really to look at that, particularly in terms of Section 106 funding and the need to spend that by July 19. We felt there was an opportunity with the new TRIP funding to actually see how we could actually bring some of these monies together. There's also a Green Infrastructure Fund that's also come online, which we're looking at. And also in terms of the active travel programmes, there's a few different opportunities we can start sort of in our terms really to look at a funding cocktail really in terms of how we phase this approach. So we're really looking at a 10 to 15-year plan in terms of remodelling, and there's some direct interventions which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But really the purpose of appointing some consultants, which start in October and will finish in March, was actually how we turn this vision into delivery. And in terms of Councillor Davis, we've got many options here, but how do we actually make these things happen? And that's come up in a few of the stakeholder workshops that we've been running, which have been really well attended. So we reviewed the vision and the plan, and really these design proposals that we're discussing today are very much proposals. So sort of in very early stages in terms of highways and planning. We've had one consultation with our stakeholders within the community, so very much early stages, so no decisions have been made as yet. But also fitting around to a certain extent within the TRIP funding as well, and seeing how we can deal with a few problems, address a few problems in one really. So there's clearly some issues and opportunities. If we take the castle in terms of the far corner there, how we connect that really more into the town centre, it's sort of very much out on a limb at the moment. So how we look at that cross area in terms of improving traffic flow, in terms of pedestrians moving back and forth between the two. How we look at the Jubilee Way area and the car park, which at the moment when you come into that area is very much the back end of shops and the loading bays. And also then how we look at the retail centre as itself, how we then look to the linkages with Asda and bringing people from Asda and the hub into the town centre, and also the linkages then with the school and how we sort of bring things together a bit more. So it's very much about how we improve the built environment, so in terms of general refurbishment, upgrading pavement areas, street furniture. And we've also, the public consultations very come out in terms of need for public art, planting, signage strategies, to ensure that it comes across as a more consistent and coherent offer than is there at present. So in terms of the remodelling of the retail units, we've been looking at, particularly in terms of an opportunity to remodel the old Store 21 area, and there's some interest there that we're starting to see now in terms of our conversations with land agents and landlords who are actually seeing as sort of an increase in interest now. Also, there's an opportunity to look sort of as a Taste of Caldecott and an enterprise offer in terms of local community businesses and startups. They've been running a pop-up campaign. Some of those have actually run from a pop-up, actually taken sort of retail units within the town, so that's been successful for the Caldecott town team. So how we give them a stronger presence really, and how we move forward with it with everybody on board. So really the main proposal that we discussed would have been on the 8th of January with our stakeholders was looking at putting in some housing 1 and 2 bed units, 9 1-bed and 18 2-bed, which we know there's a need for in terms of our housing assessments. I'm really looking at how that would then enable us to improve the car parking without the loss of space in terms of car parking, official car parking spaces, but also there was a need to ensure that we need to keep the public toilet convenience there as well. So although it's very difficult to see the detail, that will come later, but really sort of very much stone front, wood cladding, to very much look at the environment to sort of make sure it's in tune, and looking at quality development, really looking at solar panels, that kind of thing. Really to sort of see how we improve that area. The other area we're looking at is very much the castle and the cross connection. So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of how we build in that traffic back and forth and maximise that tourist attraction that we have there really. So really looking at how we reinforce the pedestrian movement, how we also facilitate that with vehicular movement, and obviously the need for delivery and market access, and then potential then to move bus stops to improve views. We've clearly got got some shared space schemes, you know, sort of in Abergavenny, Brewery Yard, and a new potential one at Morrison's there that's being discussed at the moment. So it's not an unusual phenomenon. We do feel it would work in that area, but clearly there's a lot of consultation to take place with highways as well, and making sure that that's a safe environment for that to work in. And the idea really that we then create a place where people can stay and linger, that we would actually look at the street furniture, we'd look at the paving areas to make sure that it's very much pedestrian friendly, but also in keeping in terms of the town, looking at local stone and that kind of thing, and ensuring we've got access and movement. These are just some examples of some of the street furniture that we could be looking at really in terms of improving that built environment and really in terms of how all these things could come together. So it's very much, as I said, about looking at how we maximise a strategic funding opportunity. TRIP is the old Vibrant and Viable Places pot of money, which we haven't been successful with in the past, but we are having very early negotiations with Welsh Government. And I think with all the focus being on the Severn Bridge tolls, I think we've got a good chance now in terms of really sort of putting it out there, and they do seem to be quite receptive. There's a 70% intervention rate, so clearly we'll need to look at putting in some capital funding. We don't have the figures at the moment, but it's just really to alert you that that could be where we are. But it's very much about focusing on sustainable regeneration, it's very much about the well-being of the community, and looking at sort of job creation and opportunities as well, so how we address our social issues, and you know, very much focus then in terms of how we improve the overall well-being and, as I say, links to schools, etc., and then how we match that then with our existing Section 106 funds, really to make the money go further and to have more of an impact. In terms of next steps, we require regional endorsement of the TRIP schemes, which means it needs to go through the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal Board. We've produced a 2-page summary identifying our strategic vision and barriers. That's then going to be produced into a regional plan, which then will be signed off, and that will then be the basis for our project submission in terms of sort of the regen opportunities there. But clearly we've got a lot of ongoing community and stakeholder consultation. We've run various sort of workshops, but also there's a newsletter that's going out regularly, and very much keeping in touch with our community and also councillors and also town councillors as well. So any questions? It's a bit of a run through, but I know you've had these slides before, so.
Okay, thank you very much, Kath. Councillor Davis, I know you've got a strong interest in this project, being it falls in your ward, I believe. So.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it does fall in my ward, but I've been involved previously in my role as chairman of the programme board and other things. I'm very pleased, Kath, to see that, you know, at long last it's receiving the attention I think it deserves. Everybody in Caldicot is an expert on what's needed in the town centre, including myself. And in fairness to the town team, I think they've done an excellent job of trying to promote Caldicot against a very difficult background, but it was never practical to expect the town team to produce the sort of things that we are talking about. That was always a job for professionals, which was something I kept emphasising all the time, that they really didn't have the skills to do that. I think they've done an excellent job on the one side. Expectations were perhaps raised too high in what was achievable with a group of what are volunteers, really. So I'm very pleased to see the work that's gone on now with Chris. I think that's really good, and I've walked around Caldicot with Chris and a bunch of the other people, and we've looked at those sort of things that you're talking about. I think people will have to be aware that this is a long-term project, and we don't want to raise people's expectations to say that things are going to be knocked down tomorrow and we're going to start, because anybody that's been involved with Caldicot Town Centre will tell you it's very complex. There are a number of different landlords. You know, the design of the town centre doesn't lend itself really. You know, what really needed was a bulldozer, to be honest, but that's not going to happen. There's a lot of market research needs to go on to attract the right sort of retailers. What do they need? Because at the end of the day, it's not about what we think, it's about what they say they need in order to come in. I think there's going to be a massive amount of expansion around the Caldicot area, so there's got to be an incentive for companies to come in, particularly now with the Severn bridge tolls going down. My point is, yet again, is who's responsible for driving the initiative forward, and we just need to keep up that momentum without raising expectations too high, I think, initially, because there's a lot of things people need to say yes before we can move forward significantly, I think. But I'm very pleased that it's actually having the attention that it deserves, and I wish everybody well and hope that we get the town centre that Caldicot deserves. Thank you.
Ultimately, it's myself who's responsible, so I'll hold my hand up. We've also got Jude Langdon, who's our Community and Partnership Development Lead in that area, who also covers sort of Chepstow and Mega as well, so I have a good understanding in terms of Severn side. We're working very closely with our friends in Highways and Planning. And Chris's contract is in place until the end of March. If we need to extend that, that's exactly what we'll look to do. The advantage of working with Chris is he's worked for the authority in the past and he knows that area extremely well. He'd also done some work in terms of the town team and the town council, so I had a good understanding of everybody's different views, really. So I think that's helped us move forward sort of more amicably, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Bigber.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a soft spot for Caldicot because my son used to play for Caldicot professionally. He got £5 for a win. Yay! Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant, this work is happening, and it's massive job for you. I've been in this scheme long enough to know there's kind of 3 elements to getting anything done. Number 1, it's finding money and having money to carry out a needs analysis. Number 2, step 2 is getting enough money to plan and design. And that's then when it tends to just stop and then things aren't done. And I'm looking at Monmouth, there was something very similar where there was a needs analysis and a design put together for the area along the river, including the bridge, and nothing's happened because there's no money. And that's the biggest stumbling block, I think. And I guess you started talking about where you think the funds can come from, but what is the risk, particularly when you look at this dark and bleak financial situation, not just within Monmouthshire, but actually nationally across the UK. What's the risk of it stopping at stage 2, nice designs, but can't get anything done?
In terms of market needs analysis, we're coming at this on 2 fronts at the minute. We've got the specific work in Caldicot, but we're also doing a future economies analysis. So we've just appointed BE Group, working alongside colleagues in planning and the LDP, really, to understand what the growth sectors are going forward, what the needs will be, opportunities in terms of where potential growth in terms of settlements will be. So we've got contacts within that team that are already speaking to Chris, so it's going to be very much in terms of how that fits then and will inform our inward investment strategy and also our business and enterprise growth strategy. In terms of the moving it forward, we asked them to move forward on 3 fronts, so 3 projects. So in terms of what we're talking about at the moment, that's the residential scheme, that's the cross scheme, and then potentially looking at the Taste of Enterprise scheme and also various linkages. We've also talked about how we can improve the offer in the hub, not move the building, but actually improve how that works at the moment. And that also is being informed through the co-working study we've got running at the moment through the Rural Development Programme. So with those 3 schemes, that will enable us to be very specific in terms of what we're looking for, how much it's going to cost and what the benefits will be, and then how we fine-tune that in terms of the potential funding streams for each of those. So the idea is that we can make sure we're very clear in terms of which pots we're bidding for, that hopefully we don't get that stall.
Just to say, because what I'd hate to see is that all good intentions and aspirations are just filed away on a dusty shelf because of lack of money at the end.
Chair, can I just sort of interject there if I can, please? Because I think it's a really key point that goes wider than just Caldicot. The point about, you can get a couple of grand here and there, cobble it together to do a needs analysis and some pretty plans, but it's about what comes next. And I do think that post-Brexit, Wales is going to be in a really difficult situation because access to a lot of the European money, some of which we don't get in Monmouthshire, will dry up. And around sort of innovation and digital, all of the money that we get in Wales will disappear post-Brexit. But the flip side of that, which I think this is something that this committee could sort of usefully get behind, is things like the UK government industrial strategy. Now, there's 4.6 billion available there every single year, with another 2.4 billion just announced for enhanced research and development capacity. Now, the way this money is allocated is not bidding into typical funding pots. It's about a challenge focus. So you've got to say how you're going to solve one of the big problems of the future. A big problem of the future is, what will the high street of the future look like? It is about, how much is digital going to be a presence. It is about thinking about clean growth and about artificial intelligence, ageing populations. And these are some of the grand challenges that UK industrial strategy is trying to address. So I think on the back of things like City Deal, we've got to be more ambitious, and we've got to stop thinking about little Welsh Government funding streams here and there, which we may or may not get, I'm not quite sure, and think about how we raise our ambition levels. And as this sort of growth gateway to Wales and the sort of gateway to England, I think having that ambition and understanding what is out there is going to be really important. So I think at a future session, if Kath and I can talk about things like the industrial strategy, where the City Deal is going, some of the leverage opportunities, some of the private wealth and philanthropy opportunities, there are so many out there, and I think we've just got to broaden our horizons and think about how we position for this big money, because it's there, and if we can solve big problems, it's there to be taken.
Okay, Councillor Feakins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kath. Thank you, Kelly. I think we've got to be careful that we're not putting go faster stripes on an old vehicle if we're not careful. And I think that repurposing town centres is a challenge for us all. Right across the board. In the United Kingdom, I think that the internet has obviously changed the way consumers spend money. And the purpose for the town centres. And I think we've got to be very careful that we're not, like I say, just putting go faster stripes on something that isn't necessarily purposeful anymore. I think the BMG index, which is really important, we don't end up down there, which is the booze, money and gambling index. And our indexation, our levels of that within Wales is significantly higher than the UK, than England. It's changing in Scotland because of the taxation on booze. That will have a factor to play if they do introduce a minimum price on alcohol in Wales. So again, I think it's like to sort of pick up what Kelly's point is that we need to almost rethink about what we're offering, and maybe that new delivery model of what it is that we think that we could deliver out of this would be so fresh out the box that would really engage Welsh Government to step up to the mark with some funding. But I think simply just to do new street furniture and to put some new shop fronts on probably isn't going to cut the mustard, because that's not going to re-deliver or re-engage or repurpose the town centre. Only my thoughts.
I'm going to bring in another Seven-side councillor at this point, Councillor Eason.
Thank you for letting me speak, Chair. I'll put the negative side on things. I'm a bit concerned about the question mark about TRIP. We met with Paul Matthews last night in Caldecott and your team and the planners. I wasn't aware when we discussed it last night that TRIP would, or whatever TRIP means, I can't remember the acronym for it. But I wasn't aware that 106 money would be match funded, the money we get will be match funded by 106 monies. The 106 monies is going to be competed for across the county. There doesn't seem to be much 106 money coming on stream at this present moment, this point in time. I'm anxious to know where in the future this 106 money would come from, because different communities are going to be competing for 106 money, and it will be a fight to get it. So I just wondering whether we can have some idea on that.
Shall I bring Mark Hand into this? Yeah, you happen to answer that, Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My understanding is what Kath was talking about at the moment is existing Section 106 money. It's already in the pot, and using that to secure some match funding. So we're not talking about trying to match fund the millions that Kath was talking about. But as and when new schemes are coming forward in Caldecott, because in the years to come, there's bound to be some, we can look at securing some Section 106 from that, for further assistance to this project.
Councillor Becker.
Yeah, just a point on the repurposing of town centres. This town centre is getting repurposed anyway by virtue of the bridge tolls going down. If we don't provide some sort of facility for the expansion of Caldecott to have a commercial centre for people to spend the money in, then out commuters will not have the barrier of the tolls, which stops them from going across the Cribs in 10 minutes and spending their money there. So we would be in danger if we don't repurpose our town centres in this way, as it's being forced upon us, of just creating a lot of residential commuter space, but no economic wealth in our own county. So I think that it's being repurposed by the nature of what's going on around it, and it's timely that we're getting on board with that, and we let's hope it doesn't take as slow as we think.
Okay, Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. With the repurposing of Caldecott, I think it's a great idea, great scheme. I wonder, have you given any thought to the public transport there and the options with regard to that? With the strategic rail group, we are working hard to provide better services, better train services there. And of course, we're working hard as well to try and get better bus services in and out of Bristol, Cardiff, wherever, but from that area. What they need to have, if you like, is ease of being able to get to and turn at the station, maybe even find some parking space, whatever there, but for people to kiss and drop off and go to work by public transport. So basically, I'm saying if some of the funds that you're going to put in here will go towards that. There is some people think that when the tolls come off, then there will be a migration back to the cars to drive across. A number of us and a number of other learned people say that isn't necessarily the case, because if you go across to Bristol and you've got to park your car to work for the day, you've still got to pay for the petrol, you've still got to pay for a day's parking, and you've still got the inconvenience of finding somewhere to park. So a good rail service, a good bus service, and with good facilities, so you don't stand out in the rain while you're waiting for the things, is something that we should look at as well. I don't know whether Tony has any views on that, but I think it is important that people who want to travel on public services should travel somewhere that they can keep dry for at least for and go in some sort of comfort. Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond to that, we've had quite an extensive transport study done using Rural Development Programme funding, and we've just had the interim report, which basically looks at transport right across the county and how we can optimise our transport options. We'll be producing a 2-page briefing note, really, because in terms of the options that are available to us, and I'll be doing that with Matt Gatehouse within the next few days. But also, Kelly mentioned the big challenge funds that are out at the moment, and we do intend to look at an SBRI challenge in terms of how do we come up with a proposal that enables us to optimise all the transport options. So whether it's sort of rail, grassroots, bus, all the various different options that we've got. And also in terms of private taxis, we've got the Bridges Community Transport Scheme. There are so many different things operating at the moment. We need to know how we maximise that to bring added values, because we're in another hat in terms of apprenticeships, trying to get our apprentices from home onto site when they have very little money is a very difficult problem, particularly in rural areas like ours. So it is something we're looking at quite extensively, and has also been picked up with through the budget as well, Cal, isn't it? And yeah.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to diversify a little bit because we've got the right people in the room now. I'm travel quite often over to Bristol, and I did the other day actually. Went to a place called Pucklechurch, and every time I go over there and I look at the amount of development that's taking place, a mile after mile of industrial units, and I come back to Monmouthshire and I think, why aren't we got anything in Monmouthshire? Now, I might be a bit of a dreamer, and I'm probably not the only one, but
Here's another one.
what I don't know, what I'm not aware of, obviously, and I haven't got this information, and that's why Mark is here, and he has. You know, if we're talking about regional development and working with these regions and our friends over the bridge, what facilities have we actually got available to us within Monmouthshire if we wanted to develop a strategy for bringing those sort of companies that are currently in Bristol over into Monmouthshire? I'm not talking about the regional Newport development, but I talk just as a Monmouthshire perspective. If we could attract them, what facilities have we got to offer them if they could come? You know, that I think it's important to develop that sort of strategy. Thank you.
I think that is absolutely critical. And Deb Hill-Howells, who's our new head of commercial and corporate landlord, her area of focus at the moment is on two main things. One is writing a commercial strategy, which gives us the ability to acquire those assets and then sell them on for commercial yield. But also to undertake some of this, because with the announcement about the bridge tolls around areas such as Newhouse Farm, you know, that property, those sites are flying out of the door, and we need a piece of that as well. Going back to your point about, you know, income generation to yield commercial benefits, this stuff is going to be really important. So we do have our own portfolio. It's limited. I mean, Kath and I have just had a request this morning, for example, for a waste and refuse recycling site. They want 33 acres of prime land in the centre of the county. Well, you know, we're not always geared up. We don't have those things at our disposal, so it's very difficult. So I think we need to be much more progressive and dynamic in acquiring those kinds of things that we know there's a market opportunity for. That takes research, due diligence and rigour, but we've definitely got the opportunities. We meet with property consultants, what are they called, Kath? M4 property consultants. So they give us sort of a market heads up now and again, and we believe there is massive demand out there. It's just how quickly we can get into the game to start acquiring, disposing and making some money. But it does require, for some part, a change in our local development plan.
Councillor Davis. Yeah.
That was the point I was going to make about the local, and I've actually read the local development plan, believe it or not. Couldn't sleep. I suppose the question is, have we got a commercial development plan as separate from a local development plan, or should we have one?
Yes, we should, and that's the piece of work that Deb is doing now. So it's going to be a plan that covers commercial opportunities, but also sort of asset opportunities for us as a corporate landlord. So rather than just looking after our estate for internal purposes, is how can we make money from engaging with the market by, one, exploiting our existing estate, and two, acquiring new property portfolios that, as I say, we can yield some benefit from. But I think, Mark, you know, we agree that some of the changes and some of the parameters are going to have to move slightly in order to enable us to optimise that opportunity. So we can have a great commercial strategy, but if we don't have the right land use plan underpinning it, then one will compromise the other. So I think it's about taking them forward in tandem, isn't it?
Can I just say, Chair, in terms of this committee, we are called Economy and Development, and I would say that is a key area for this committee to be concentrating on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Did you want to add to that, Mark?
Only really briefly, Chair. I mean, just to add to what Kelly said, I mean, the LDP, we've literally got acres of employment land allocated, but part of the project that Kath mentioned, the Economies of the Future work, they're looking at, you know, what are the needs of the industries coming forward? Where are the growth sectors? Some of the things will be, you know, very much governed by external forces. So things like the bridge tolls, potentially the M4 Leaf Road, could change whether there's demand or not for distribution centres or some of those more land hungry uses. And then there's all kinds of other tech coming forward, and we need to understand a little bit what are the physical land use requirements of those, where do they need to be, what do they need. some of our sites haven't come forward for various market reasons. One of them, which is in a really key site, it's got about 5 landowners, so that's an immediate, barrier to it coming forward. So again, we're talking with colleagues such as Deb, are there different things we can do to bring some of that forward? If we conclude they're in the right place, how do we get it to actually get delivered? So all those conversations are happening, and as Kelly mentioned, in tandem, bringing that forward, this commercial development plan, and the. Well, I'm trying not to preempt the decision on the current consultation, but in all likelihood, the new LDP.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? No. Oh, Councillor Devi.
Just one thought has been going through my mind for a little while. And by the way, I'm really pleased to have Alan by the side of me, because I suspect Kelly has got tired of me saying similar things over the past years. I welcome an ally. One of the things that I do think we ought to be, if you like, advertising ourselves very cheaply, if you want, is with the property that we still have down at Mega. And I would have thought that we could have turned that, if you like, into a property unit where it is inhabited, it is signed, and it's selling to every motorist that comes by, every businessman that comes by. This is basically, this is the Monmouthshire Development Unit. You could come here, more information here, or whatever. But we should have a presence there, even if it is only advertising the information that people need to have to be able to contact us. I think we're a little remote in County Hall here. I think if we had a presence down there, we would be closer to the action, and it wouldn't cost us a fortune.
Thank you very much for that comment, Councillor Devi. If that's everything from members, can I say that as a committee, I think we really welcome this development and this opportunity to develop Caldecott. It's clear that we've identified as you're going to be the lead on this, Kath, so we welcome future engagement on this going forward. It's clear that further engagement work needs to be done with local businesses and local retailers, and it sounds like that we're in a good position to do that, because we've got our officers working hard, liaising closely with the ground. There's a close dovetailing here with our future LDP and with a commercial development plan, which is going to be vitally important to match the needs of those who are looking at Monmouthshire as a place to develop business in terms of what our offer is going to be. And it's clear from our discussions about repurposing town centres, repurposing town centres is more than just a cosmetic change. It's got to be a cultural change, and that's got to be ingrained from bottom up. We have to be led by businesses who are already in situ, and those who want to move into the area as well. And I think, Councillor Debbie, I know this is your area of expertise of transport. I think that's absolutely key as well to all of this, linking our communities, our towns together, as well as trying to encourage other people to come in a sustainable manner. To come into Monmouthshire in a sustainable manner, and not add to any additional negative traffic flows on the M4 and across that corridor area. So can I thank you, Kath, and can I thank Mark as well for your interjections and clarifying some of that. Before we move on to the next item, can I suggest we take a 5-minute comfort break and then we move on? Okay, thank you. Okay, councillors, if we can start taking our places, please.
Right, folks, can we take our seats now for the last item, please?
I'm ready, Chair.
Okay, thank you, councillors. It's the last few items on the agenda. So item number 7 is the pre-decision scrutiny section 106 procedure note and policy guidance. And I think we've got Mark Hand and Martin Davis who are going to do this jointly. So thank you, Mark.
Yes, right. Thanks very much, Chair. What we're seeking is the Select Committee's comments and endorsement on these 3 documents before they go to Cabinet for approval. Just quickly in terms of sequence of events, we're bringing this to you today. You've hopefully seen in your diaries there's a seminar, an all-member seminar proposed on the 1st of February in the afternoon to go through Section 106 issues, and that's something that arose from this committee quite a long time ago, actually, probably not long after the elections, with members seeking some clarification on how Section 106 works and some of perhaps what seems a bit like a dark art behind the scenes, how things are calculated. So that's planned for the 1st, and then we'd aim to take it to Cabinet in March once we've got all of those comments. So we won't duplicate, which unfortunately means we'd like you to come to the 1st as well as be here today. The 3 bits that we're looking at today, there's a procedure note, which is an updated version of a note, sets out how these things are done, with a couple of tweaks that are coming from a recent audit, but general updates in. There's a guidance note that we've produced, which hopefully just gives yourselves, colleagues within the planning team and other departments and customers some clarity on what's required and when, and I'll touch on that a bit more in a minute. And then third and final is we've always had Cabinet member approval for how much leisure contributions are with an annual inflationary increase. But that hadn't been put forward in the last year or so. So we're tying all of this in together to get those figures there. And it all links in seamlessly with this one document. So I'll set out a little bit of background about Section 106 just to set the scene, and then we'll move on to a bit about the procedure notes and a bit about the guidance note, which Martin will cover. So I think you're probably pretty, if not very familiar with Section 106, but as a quick recap, it's the way in which we can seek contributions from developers, financial contributions, to enhance the quality of the development, provide some community benefits and infrastructure, and to mitigate negative impacts from that particular development. So we negotiate it through the application process, and where the Section 106's contributions are considered necessary, that all will be secured before we issue the planning permission. One of the things to flag up is we're in the middle of a transition from the way it was working, which I guess in a a bit of a casual summary. We got the money for some things and then worried about how to spend it at the end. And you'd have been used to seeing cabinet reports about how to spend leisure money once the development had happened and the money come through the door. We're transitioning from that approach to a front-loaded approach. So partly because of some regulation changes and partly because of the pre-application service we now offer and what we're required to do in that, we need to be telling customers up front what we're going to be asking for and what it will be spent on. So we're trying to shift everything to the front of the process. So by the time it comes to committee for a decision, we know where the money's going, how much it is, what the trigger points will be, and then it's just a case of signing the legal agreement, and that's all done and dusted. To get to that point, we're trying to do some work with the communities team to understand what some of those community priorities are, so that can feed in from the beginning. So especially around leisure, rather than asking them at the very end, what do you want this money spent on, we need to try and find that out at the start, have a little pipeline of projects, and then colleagues like Mike Moran can go through that list and put the appropriate ones into the mix. So the types of infrastructure we typically look at, you'll all be familiar with. So affordable housing, education, leisure space, green infrastructure and travel are the main ones. And a bit of a proviso, especially with some of the conversations we've had this morning around sources of funding and other priorities and how we could raise money and do things differently. Under the regulations that came into force a few years ago, but these work backwards to 2010, there's a restriction on how many contributions we can have towards the same type of infrastructure, so a pooling restriction it's called. You can only have 5 planning contributions for the same infrastructure or type of infrastructure. So when application number 6 comes along, even if it's for 1 million houses, we can't ask for any more money for that same infrastructure project. So that can be quite a challenge when we have several smaller schemes that you need a little bit of money from each to go towards a bigger project. So that's something we're trying to work around. And again, that comes into why we're front loading it, because if we keep asking at the old system for a contribution towards leisure in Abergavenny and then worry about how the money's spent afterwards, we can only do that 5 times. So we need to be really specific about the projects it's going to, because then we can do that and keep seeking the money. The main restriction is the money, the 106 contribution has to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, has to be directly related to the development, has to be fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. So we can't ask for anything, financially disproportionate. And it has to essentially offset an infrastructure demand that's come from that property. So one of the conversations we've been having in other forums around things like broadband, we can't just create a slush fund so that, houses in Monmouth somehow contribute towards broadband in a rural area. It's not directly linked, unfortunately. If we ever get onto community infrastructure levy in the future, then that could change. But we'll talk about that another day. So quickly around how it's done, there's a Section 106 working group that takes place. The purpose of this group is to monitor Section 106 agreements from the first stages through to spending the monies received. It's kind of quite process audit type driven, and it's been in place for several years. We meet quarterly and I chair it, and there's officer reps from all the different departments, so education, leisure, highways, communities, and we also have member representation on the group as well. So really we're going through flagging up anywhere the spending deadline's coming up, and we need to make sure we spend the money and don't lose it and have to pay it back. And also just check on other bits and pieces, have sites had their adoptions completed and the like. But we want to try and refocus some of that group just to look at some of those community priorities and the front loading of the process, and a bit less of the detailed monitoring. We can do that in a slightly different way. So the procedure note that's in the documents pack updates an old 2009 document, and there's the main reasons on the top slide there. So takes into account some changes in regulations, LDP policy, and the new pre-app advice service. We've used it as an opportunity to tweak and refine other bits of the process, and it sets out, those different stages, who does what in terms of finance when the money comes in, how do we make sure everyone knows the money's in and when it's being spent and the like. So it's proved pretty effective over the years. It's really just an update. So there's it's taken about a year really to refine it, because we keep going around in circles of trying to get the detail right. But I think we're there now. So I'll pass over to Martin now to talk about the policy guidance notes, and then we'll come back with any questions from yourselves.
Yes, the policy guidance note sets out an approach to guide negotiations for Section 1 planning obligations between the council and developers. It had been intended to produce supplementary planning guidance, SPG, on Section 106 following the adoption of the LDP in 2014. But the council had already made a decision to carry out preliminary work on adopting community infrastructure levy, SIL. So it was decided to defer the SPG because there is a very complicated relationship between Section 106 and SIL, and also the SIL money would replace a lot of the funding that we get through Section 106s. The implementation of SIL has been taken longer and has been more difficult than anticipated. And there's also considerable uncertainty of whether we should go forward with SIL. There was a peace review in 2016 that suggested many changes to the process. And they were going to come out of the Chancellor's autumn budget last November, although he didn't address many of the issues that were raised by the review report. So we're still uncertain. That's also been passed over to the Welsh Government, and we've no idea what the Welsh Government are going to do with SIL. So as time is dragging on, it has a pressing need to have a guidance note, to have something written down for developers and applicants on how we're going to deal with Section 106s and how we're going to negotiate the various items. So the slide sets out the contents of the document, the structure of the document, and following a section on the policy and legal context, which includes some of the restrictions on Section 106 that Mark's already mentioned. There's the next section set out how planning obligations will be negotiated in the various topic areas. And then there's a couple of concluding sections, procedure and monitoring, that just set out some brief items from the procedure note, just so that the developers and applicants and the public are aware of what will happen with Section 106s once the application is determined. In terms of affordable housing is one of the things mentioned, and or one of the sections of the guidance note. The detailed procedures for negotiating Section 106s on affordable housing are set out in adopted affordable housing SPG, but for the sake of being complete, there are a couple of pages just summarising these main elements. And the guidance note also includes excerpts from the LDP, so that sets out the policy requirements that justify asking for Section 106 financial contributions, because there always has to be a policy basis for what we're asking for in Section 106. So the main policy in terms of the justification for asking for financial contributions through Section 106 is LDP Policy S7, which is set out in full in the guidance note. So this seeks to ensure that new development is accompanied by an appropriate level of infrastructure to assist in providing for sustainable communities, to make sure the development meets the principles of the general principle of maintaining communities. But the policy also emphasises, and it's something that was very important that we put into the policy, that due regard is to be paid to overall development viability. We shouldn't be asking for anything if it affects the viability of a scheme and prevents this coming forward. So the policy also includes basic priorities on what would come first in asking for contributions, and essential would be the infrastructure necessary to overcome obstacles to a development in order to enable it to be physically delivered and made acceptable. So that could be like a new roundabout or something like that was needed to actually bring a site forward. Without that infrastructure, the development couldn't take place. So the second priority set out in the policy is that compliance with affordable housing requirements is important, more important over other possible policy requirements. But where there are viability concerns, then it has to be looked at. There is an overwhelming need, that's the terminology used in the policy, for the contribution to be allocated for other necessary purposes. So I won't go through all the different topic areas, but just to highlight a couple of them. In terms of education, it's just something that's always a regular concern. We have a new development where there's capacity in the schools that service that development. We do adopt a formula approach. The education facility has got this formula that they use. There's the table there sets out the formula for primary school education, where depending on the size of the development, the number of bedrooms or the number of occupiers, they have a figure that per 1,000 that's required in terms of new pupil places, and you can work as a formula and works that back to the number of places that are needed for a particular development. So once you've established the number of pupils that a development might generate, the next stage would be to look at the capacity of the school in the catchment area in which the development is located. If there is capacity, well, all well and good. If there isn't, the next stage would be to look at other schools within the cluster area that school is located in. So that would be looking at schools within 2 miles of the development, because that's the government legislation on beyond that distance. You'd have to finance transport for people to get to school. So that would be the next stage, look at school within 2 miles in that cluster area. And if there's still no capacity, then that would be the point where we would seek contribution for those pupils that can't be accommodated. And there are standard figures that we've had from the Welsh Government through our education section that sets out standard costs for pupil places, and that's included in the guidance note as well, although it does need a little bit of tweaking just to update. Another main policy is the open space requirements. They are set out in LDP policy CRF2. There's a table there which summarises they based on what used to be the Playing Fields Association, now Fields on Trust, or the amount of open space that's needed to serve a development. So again, the policy justification is for asking for contributions or for open space is based on that policy, CRF2. Where it's not possible to provide on site, then the normal practice is to seek contributions for off-site provision. And we have a charging schedule for the calculations of recreation and public open space development contributions and commuted sums when the land is actually offered for adoption. And that's the document set out in Appendix C. That was last approved by Cabinet member back in 2015. So it's quite an important need to update that to take account of the effects of inflation and rising costs. And that's why we're taking the opportunity to get that agreed at this same moment. And the intention is that contributions document will be included as an appendix to the main guidance. So whereas the policy asks for open space and sort of public playing fields and things like that, we also, as a matter of policy of this council, we use financial contributions to a range of recreation facilities, not just outdoor sport. So we could be looking for contributions on community halls or leisure centres and swimming pools, which is something we've been doing over the last couple of years. So as we've got these basic standards, the green infrastructure approach, which looks at things more holistically, then that's moving away from set standards. And you have to look at you can consider how open space could be used for a number of uses. For instance, space set aside for biodiversity or ecological connectivity could be used for walking and cycling or provide a more informal sort of play space for children. So that would be part of the negotiation process, and we get representations from our GI team. So what they require, and the opportunities could be taken perhaps to be more flexible and move away from our space standards, and not just to have a number of little play areas throughout the site, which is not very well used and difficult to maintain.
So in terms of next steps, and Chair, there's a member seminar on the 1st of Feb that I mentioned, and we'll go through what we're hoping to do is have colleagues from the various departments here. We can explain a bit more about the way in which the contributions are worked out, give some detail on how much has been secured over various projects over the recent years, and address any questions that come up from members, because I imagine there's quite a few, and then report to Cabinet on the 7th of March to seek final sign-off of those documents for proper use. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Martin. Questions, Councillor Roden?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for an interesting presentation, both. 2 questions, basically about aspects of Appendix A. And the first is what impact will the regulation 123 pooled contributions have, and have you got any thoughts on how these will be overcome? Because it does seem to be quite a complex and a difficult thing to see the way forward on that, from my perspective anyway. And secondly, Appendix A111, if there's a dispute over viability issues, payment for expert arbitration would be upon the developer. I think that's rather unfair if the developer were to win. I think that the council should contribute something towards that. But I'd be interested to hear what you have to say on that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the pooling restriction, Martin might want to come in with a bit more detail. The way we're trying to work around it or work with it is, as I mentioned, by being as specific as possible at the outset about what the money will be spent on. If we just asked for a contribution to primary education, then you can only do that 5 times. But if we're specific and say it's needed to extend the Dell school, then we can do that 5 times. That's the approach we're working on. So by being clever and specific, we're less likely to come up against the pooling restriction. What we're hoping is that when the SIL regs are reviewed, there's actually talk about them potentially removing that part of the regs. It doesn't really seem to serve much purpose. I guess going back a step, excuse me, SIL was introduced to try and give developers certainty, and the idea was they'd know there's like a flat roof tax, they'd have to pay it, and everyone knew where they stood. I think as it turns out, developers don't really like it. The risk for us is if we do have SIL, the only place left for negotiation, because once it's set, the only place left for negotiation is affordable housing, generally speaking, and that's one of our priorities. And it hasn't quite worked, I don't think, as everyone intended. So they're looking at reviewing it. If that pooling restriction comes out, then that will be really helpful. But as Martin mentioned, there's the peace review that's taken place, and we're expecting some conclusions from that, but they haven't really come out yet in terms of budget changes. And then in addition, SIL's in the process of being devolved to the Welsh Government, or large chunks of it. I think that's due to happen next month, actually. But then there'll probably be another time, like where the Welsh Government decides what it wants to do with it. So we're in a bit of a weird scenario at the moment. So for now, we've got to assume that the pooling restriction is there and is there to stay for the imminent future. And that's the best we can do to work around it, is by being as specific as possible.
Councillor Roden?
With regard to the pooling effect, if you have a massive project to undertake, how would you actually fund that? Through the S106 monies? Is the pool of from 5 sources going to be big enough, basically? Or would you just specify over and over again for that one major project? Thank you.
That is the challenge. I mean, we can only ask for an amount of money that actually works financially for the scale of the project. So yeah, you could potentially have 5 law developments that need an extension on a school, for example, but that's not enough to actually fund it. But that's potentially as much as we can get. And then the council will have to foot the rest. That is one of the challenges. I'm just thinking what your other question was from earlier. Oh yes.
Should the council expect the developer to foot the bill if the developer actually wins in the subsequent arbitration?
It's more of a review by the District Valuation Service than full-on arbitration. So it's something we make them pay for. Excuse me, I'm slowly losing my voice. It's something we make them pay for to demonstrate their case. It isn't a huge sum of money, but obviously we'd rather not foot any of that bill. Cheers.
Okay. Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mark, for the presentation.
Some years ago, about 8 to 9 years ago, 100 and odd houses were built at Usk, and we had £300,000 S106 money. If that was decided upon by a committee, there were, I think, a couple of officers from the county council, the mayor of Usk and local county councillor, decided on how that money was allocated. Some went to the memorial hall, some went to the rugby club, athletic club, etc. If you now are going to arrange for the money or agree a sum of money up front, as I think you said would happen, how is that money allocated to a similar project? Do you then consult with the town council, etc., to form a committee and decide or ask for people to give their bids, as it were, for some of that money? Is that the way it will work, or is there some other way that it's going to do?
That's part of the challenge we're trying to work through, Chair. This mainly comes up with off-site adult leisure recreation contributions, which is similar to the example you've given. So what used to happen is you have a report to Cabinet at the very end. People would have bids and a decisions made. So we need to identify at the outset what those community priorities are. So we're working with Mike Moran and Judith Langton in particular to try and get that information together. I think we're hoping to go through the community council cluster areas to try and get some of that work done and identify some of those priorities there. But that is very much work in progress at the moment. So at the moment we're relying, primarily, I think Martin would agree, on Mike Moran's knowledge of what communities have said in the past, and he's going out a little bit ad hoc at the moment to find it, and we're trying to get that whole process in place so we've got that information up front. But that's certainly work in progress.
Councillor Strong?
Thanks for that, Mark. It's really reversed the position so that Mike Moran is involved initially, and then it's worked out from there. Okay, thank you.
That's something that one possibility is the implementation of place plans, which is something we've been looking at, again, very initial stages and work in progress. The Welsh Government are trying to encourage place plans, but there's nothing in legislation for them, but they're trying to encourage community and town councils to produce plans for their area. The ideal would be spatial planning, which could then be adopted as SPGs part in connection with local development plans. But that is probably very restrictive. That community councils probably look a lot more than just spatial planning. But place plans could also be an option for looking at sort of infrastructure requirements and trying to establish priorities. But and again, that's, as Mark said, it's work in progress, working with the Community and Partnership Development team, and they are also considering the options for local wellbeing plans at a more local level. But that could be one way of doing things, is a place plan, some sort of place plan, where you work in advance what your priorities you want to establish for a community.
Okay.
Just to mention briefly, Chair, the one reason we haven't necessarily gone out waving that banner to the community councils at the moment is the place plan has to align with the LDP that sits above it. It all sounds very bottom up, but the reality it isn't quite. And given that we're highly likely to be changing our LDP, we don't want people to set off doing a load of potentially abortive work aligning with our current LDP. I need to find the goalposts that suddenly moved. So I think, again, some of that's going to come out with a bit of time. But yeah, I'd hesitate to recommend they all rush out and do a place plan now, because I think what sits above it is about to change.
Councillor Feakins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gents. A couple of questions, really, regarding the pooling restriction. I would imagine that would create some sort of implications on the budget, in as much as that we need some sort of buffer within the budget to keep match funding, that jam jar accountancy dynamic, which we're going to have to develop in order to keep topping up. So, for example, we have one barn development comes through and it's 25 grand. That 25 grand might have to go in with someone else's 12 grand, and then we might have to match that up to 90 grand, for argument's sake, whatever that whatever that is. So we're going to end up with lots of pots of cash sat there waiting, and the only way we're going to be able to deliver out of those pots would be if we match fund that, which means we're going to have a very imbalance all the time to keep match funding that in order to deliver whatever it is we want it to deliver. That's only one observation really, and I'm not really looking for a response on that. But on the just out of interest on the way contributions are going to work, does the ADM have any influence on that, or does that affect our ability to draw down Section 106 monies for within an ADM model, as opposed to a model at the moment whereby we're delivering leisure ourselves?
That's a good question. I believe it can still work. I'm pretty sure it can still work. So it is still an arm's length part of the council, as my understanding, the way it would work. And it's certainly, Newport's gone through a similar situation with an alternative delivery model for their leisure services. And it certainly hasn't changed practice there, but it's something we need to speak to our colleagues about and thrash out quite how it works. But yeah, not all of the, I suppose thinking on my feet, not all the money that we get in at the moment goes to things that we own. It could be other, rugby clubs or community centres that other people own, and they have some infrastructure funding. So I don't think it should change anything in a detrimental fashion. It's just a different way of delivering that same service. But that's something that we need to give a bit more thought to. Just really quickly in terms of pooling, we haven't actually come across this headache yet, but we monitor where we are with the pooling restrictions and make sure we know how much scope we have still got. There might come a time when we have a relatively small scheme and we make a conscious decision not to ask for a particular contribution on that, because we know that just on the horizon's a much bigger scheme, and we'd miss out on a better pot of money, if you know what I mean. So we're trying to think cleverly as far as we can.
Matt, you okay? Yep. Councillor Blakeborough.
Thanks. Matt, can I award you that ADM question as question of the day? A good bit of lateral thinking there, I thought. That was, very good. Just a couple of I suppose a general observation, because it seems to me that we need a more strategic way of spending the money rather than, as you said, more kind of just reacting, a reactive approach. And I guess SIL is the total strategic way forward, and these sets of policy and guidance is kind of a midway compromise, it sounds. Yeah. So as I say, I sort of welcome these. Just a couple of questions. One has been partially answered, but I know, being on planning, there's many a time when we have been told we'd have so much money, 106 money, affordable housing, and as they developed their designs and it goes further along to a point of no return, they suddenly say, oh no, we can't afford the 106 money now. And I'm just wondering what's in place to prevent developers from, and I've used the word massaging, the residual value calculation in order to avoid or reduce their 106 obligations. And this second question is just around the 106 group. What is the membership? Is it cross-party membership on that group, do you know?
Chair, if I do the second easier one first. Yeah, it is cross-party membership. I'm trying to think now. Councillor Murphy and Councillor Greenland are invited and attend. Councillor David Evans, Councillor Amweb, I think, with a National Park hat on, because National Park's invited in as well. I'm not sure about independents. Yeah. I don't see why not. I mean, it functions as an officer working group chaired by me rather than as a political group. But ever since I've been here, there were members attending and it works well. So we've carried on. So yeah, I haven't got a problem with another person coming along. In terms of your first question, God, my memory's going today. What was the first part of your question?
About what's in place, what processes are in place to prevent developers from, and I've used the word massaging, residual value calculation in order to kind of avoid
That's the primary reason that we go to the District Valuation Service as an independent body, because they will look through everything. They look at land transactions, sales figures in the area. They'll scrutinise the build costs, and they've got their own quantity surveyors that will, pick them apart and see what's reasonable, what isn't. So it is pretty scientific and robust scrutiny of what's in. They're expected to come to us on an open book basis. The system's not perfect. They'll quite often base their build costs on what we call the BCIS figures, the Building Construction Industry Standard figures, I think that stands for. And they have a kind of a figure for the Gwent area, because even that differs around the country. But typically, the small builders and the RSLs are the ones that feed their information into that data, and their costs are typically a bit higher, whereas the big PLCs have some economies of scale, and they don't always put their figures into that data. But on recent ones, I'm trying to think of an example. Dairy Farm, for example, we had open book, we had persimmons, real build costs that went into the system. So, it's trying to get it as robust as we can.
Okay, Councillor Feakins.
Cheers, and thanks for letting me come back. It's just with the developer's hat on, Mark, really. I think we have to be mindful regarding Section 106s and sills that we don't end up down an avenue whereby we've only got the larger developers who have got teams of lawyers who can navigate all of the sill paperwork and Section 106 paperwork. Section 106 paperwork on its own is enough, let alone sill coming into the back end of that as well. And because it would be very easy to then have a threshold of only, you've got to be at 30 or 40 or 50 houses or whatever that development size is in order to justify the 10 grand's worth of costs for sill, or whatever that scenario is. But there is that sort of, and we have to be careful that we're not, as we've discussed in planning, that we're not sort of creating a market whereby we're not developing or delivering smaller 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 12, 15 house units.
Chair, in the policy, it sets out a threshold for things like education and recreation of 10 units. So below that, we wouldn't be seeking those contributions. The trade-off is, you can end up with kind of death by a thousand cuts, especially in some of our areas where we do just get those small developments. But we need to be mindful of those economies of scale. Behind the scenes, we're looking at the affordable housing contributions, because as you'll probably be aware, the policy allows us to get a contribution on one dwelling upwards. And we are having some challenges around that. It's ended up in some areas with a disproportionate amount of work, particularly for Shirley, trying to work out viability calculations, because developers are coming back and saying they can't. So we'll probably come forward with some suggested changes to that in the future. 99% of the time, barn conversions don't seem to be viable. So we're likely to come forward with a suggestion that we just strip those out and stop wasting our time having the arguments, because we don't seem to be getting anywhere. So we could potentially strip those out and try not to cause the problems you've alluded to.
Okay, Councillor Breakber.
And I had it here. When you're looking at the threshold, so I know that it is one dwelling. I'm just wondering, how do we compare with other authorities on the threshold, including the English neighbouring authorities?
Our threshold of 10 is broadly comparable, from my understanding, with the others that we've spoken to. So people like the Vale and Newport, we know particularly well. I don't know if Martin knows any more detail. I'm not really sure what they're up to just over the border in England, to be honest. It is probably one of the biggest viability challenges is around affordable housing. And there's an aspect of our policy that can perhaps make it harder, especially in England. There's some far more relaxed rules on affordable housing in England. They don't have DQR standards that we have. They have some types of affordable housing that Shirley will explain to you are not really affordable in any real sense, but they count towards some government figures. And also our policy stance, we require neutral tenure because our greatest need is social rented. Neutral tenure gives us that flexibility, but by definition that sets things at 42% of the ACG figure, so what the Welsh Government says a 3-bed semi, for example, is worth. That also requires us to have DQR standards. But for the greater good, for example, it tends to be in the developer's interest to have low-cost home ownership. They could potentially get more money from the RSL for that, and they sometimes see it as more attractive. So could we get a couple more units of affordable housing if we went with that option? Probably, but our greatest need is social rented. A reduced cost market house in Chepstow is still out of the reach of pretty much everybody on a housing waiting list, if not everybody. So we might get, a little bit more, but it wouldn't be actually meeting our needs. Hence, we're sticking with the policy approach we got. Some of the other costs, we were talking around viability. There's differences in areas, so just the house values and the land values in different areas varies. That affects what they can get. Again, especially around affordable housing. And I know we often celebrate the fact that house prices are going up in the one sense because it could mean more viability, but equally land values are going up and build costs are a challenge as well. So it's quite a challenge to explain and B to secure what we want out of the process.
Okay, are there any further comments, observations? No. Okay, so the report recommendation is to note the contents of the report and the attached documents and comment accordingly. So I think we probably agreed that it's right that we take a more strategic approach than a reactive approach, as potentially has been in the past. But it's important that we strengthen the engagement with our town clusters, and it's vitally important that we have a role there as well as not just as a committee but as community advocates in our own right as councillors to engage with those clusters, to identify their priority areas and then feed that back to officers. And I think that officer working group will be looking to be enhanced, and I think we probably got a potential member who might like to offer her services on that new group. Personally, I think ensuring our towns develop place plans is the way forward, and I understand there has to be harmonisation with the LDP, and obviously that has to come first. But I think that is the right approach, and those priorities then can be identified and balanced. Are we happy that we've scrutinised this enough? Yep. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Martin. Thanks very much. Oh, go on.
Chair, do you mind if I just ask one more question? Is there anything that the committee would like from the seminar on the 1st of Feb? So we can go through a bit more about how the different services work out, what's needed. We can show you what's been achieved in recent years. But if there's anything else you want,
Councillor
to
Becker, you have a...
The time. I haven't got it in my diary.
2 p.m. On the 1st of February.
If reflecting on Mark's request there, if we've got any thoughts that we want to email him, and then he can tailor that seminar even more to our needs. Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks very much. So item 8 then is our forward work planner. And you can see that there we're a bit sparsely populated for the 15th of March. We've got the Abergavenny outdoor structure there, which is to be confirmed. When that came to us before Christmas, we did ask officers for additional information before we gave our particular view on it. We're still waiting on that, and it's right that comes back and we scrutinise that further. We've got a number of other potential items that we've earmarked and listed, including City Deal. I think in terms of tourism and enterprise, it'll depend on what happens with the ADM over the next couple of weeks with the cabinet meeting and the special meeting in the council. I know we've done the further development on the procurement workshop, and that second seminar happened about a week or 10 days ago. I think Councillor Blakeborough, you were there. Do you want to just add just a quick overview?
I suppose with the overview, what I was going to do is just kind of write a little summary, I think, and then I can send it out to the committee. As I say, I think the discussion was more, it was around sort of exploring different ways of procuring services. So rather than identifying a problem, identifying the solution, and then going out the normal route of buying services in, it was doing it the other way around by saying, this is a problem, let's send it out there and let's get some innovative ideas coming back. It's worked with other organisations with some really positive unintended consequences as a result of it as well. So if I summarise that and then send it out, and then I guess at some point have them back here again just to see what progress we've made on the procurement workshops.
Yeah, and I think further to the outturn report this morning, I think Kelly promised us a further plan on procurement and how we would work that forward, so that would link in nicely. We've obviously got City Deal is an important element, and that business plan as a City Deal region is going to be signed off in the next few weeks. We've also said that we wanted to do some more reach out work with our neighbouring authorities across the water about the impact of the removal of the tolls. And obviously we had the very important Severn Growth Summit in the Celtic Manor this week, and myself and Councillor Becker attended. It's clear that we need to do more engagement work, but that engagement work needs to come from the top as well. And I know Councillor Becker did have a discussion with the Secretary of State afterwards, so I'll be interested to. Do you want to comment on that, Jason?
Yeah, I haven't actually had the discussion because he ran off, but he's got my email and has promised to talk to me. I won't hold my breath, but I am going to chase him. It was about mostly the transport issues that we'll be experiencing cross-border. One of the takeaways from the summit was that we require some kind of forum to discuss these matters. There was a lot of good talk about communication across border, but both our own council and Gloucestershire County Council were woefully under-attended. I don't think we actually received much information as members to invite us to the Severn Growth Summit. So, and there was a lot of concentration as well on the Great Western powerhouses, concentrating on the link between Cardiff and Bristol, which doesn't marry with our own experience of what the City Deal has been saying about our commuter links to Bristol. Their focus has been very much towards Cardiff. And in fact, a lot of that conversation, that narrative kind of really ignored our areas and the areas of Newport as well. So in some ways there was a lot of positive talk in that summit, and in some ways it was a little bit worrying because of the lack of actual action to meet the rhetoric. So if there is a body that is formed as a result of the summit for facilitating the cross-border thing, we need to be on that. We need to be getting ourselves on that and using that. I don't think it should be instead of our own efforts to create relationships with Gloucestershire especially, but we definitely need to add it to our string to our bow. So.
Councillor Feakins, do you want to add something?
Not to add to that, really. Just to add something else I think we should be picking up on is that earlier on we was told I forget the exact terms, but it's Economic Development Unit or something along those lines that was looking at the drivers and sort of considering the economic development of our area. I think that's something that we as our committee should definitely have our hands all over, and the procurement workshops have worked really well in as much as that they've had lots of interaction, free thinking, blue sky thinking, whatever you want to call it. But if we could have something similar along those lines for that economic development unit, so that we can feed off each other and we can sort of add our pennies worth for that forum, it would be good.
Okay. In terms of the impact and removal of the 7 tolls, I think we did say we would try and have a working group to identify our key priorities before reaching out to Gloucestershire and Bristol, etc. Should we see if we can get officer interest between now and our March meeting, and then potentially in our March meeting we may be able to take the next steps in terms of taking that forward. I know there's... Oh, go on, Councillor Davis. Oh, okay. I know there's been some interest in terms of broadband as well, and I know this has been a strong issue that Councillor Brakeber's been fighting on. Do you want to add anything to that? I know there's a ministerial meeting coming up between the cabinet member and the Welsh Government.
Yeah, I was talking to the cabinet member and to the enterprise team, and there's kind of a couple of issues really, and it's quite time bound. So I think in February the minister is going to announce 80 million towards the second phase of superfast broadband. We are not one of the first authorities, we're about in the middle. Now we've got some really good case studies where we've found local solutions that's maximised connections. So there's a good argument there for Welsh Government to give us a portion, our portion of that pot, so we can find our own solutions to take that forward. I'm also looking at, is there a possibility, because that team has to develop this broadband and make the links, and it's a huge, as I say, I think it's like dealing with the black arts myself, dealing with broadband. And I'm just wondering whether we could afford to invest in, for 2 years, a 0.5 post to really bring it all together and maximise what we can get for Monmouthshire. And possibly get Vivian Collins, who is the manager for the Superfast Broadband Scheme, here to be scrutinised to see if we are getting value for money for Monmouthshire.
Okay, that seems a really good proposal. So the suggestion is then to write on behalf of myself on behalf of the committee to write to Deputy Chief Exec, who's obviously the director of the department, to ask if resource can be found to focus on broadband in the county for the next 2 years.
It's the top of my head, but I'm thinking February it's going to be announced as that this is 80 million. So I think it's sooner rather than later, and probably 2 years could at least, sort of move us forward. Otherwise, we'll just be sitting for 2 years with absolutely nothing, which obviously is going to have a negative impact on the economy, at least the digital economy of Monmouthshire.
Okay, and the second part of that was to ask the director if they could write to Welsh Government and ask if we can have that our part allocation of that Welsh Government money come to us. We've clearly got the case studies to back up that we can do that here. So that would be part of that same letter. Is committee happy that we do that? We write on those lines, and then there would be a second letter then to Welsh Government or email to Welsh Government asking them to come to this committee so we can scrutinise that. Is the BT side. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We'll ask them to come back and scrutinise that. Councillor Dovey.
Just with regard to the Powerhouse meeting, I too didn't get notice of the meeting, but the talking about a joint approach with Gloucestershire officers in Gloucestershire. We already, with the Motor Transport Group, are working hard. Roger is working with officers in the Forest of Dean and Gloucestershire, and they are anxious that in terms of the transport, at least at the moment, that we start to work together and look at the cross-border issues around Chepstow. So some work is being done in that area, quite a lot. It's taken a while to get off the ground, but it is beginning to work now. So that there is a precedent, if you like, now that there is the counties are beginning to realise that they've got to talk to one another, no matter what the government says. And the other issue was that when I did hear about this was happening, and I spoke to the leader, and I don't know what chance he had to talk, but I did speak to him and suggest that he spoke to the Secretary of State about the issues in Chepstow as well, and how they are impacting on our economy and all that sort of thing. And I gave him a brief scenario of how he could address that. And I suggested that, bearing in mind their importance in the wider area, that it would be a good idea if he invited him down to our neck of the woods more specifically. And I think that is, I would have thought, in the light of the limited exposure he had to the whole of the issues here, that might very well be a runner if it was set up in a professional sort of way. So I'd suggest we have a go with that. And there are other things that go with it as well, and that is the fact that with regard to rails, the service provision at the moment for people within our county is absolutely awful. Great Western are just not meeting their commitments with cancellations, not the right number of units on the trains and whatnot. So there is a lot going on, or not going on, whichever way you look at it, that we could raise if we got this meeting going.
Yeah, I did manage to quickly collar the Secretary of State before he left, and made that offer to him and his special advisor, which coincidentally enough I used to work with in a previous life. So between that and I know our MP is trying to bring the Secretary of State down as well to the south of the county to understand some of the challenges. So I think there's a lot of pressure being put to bear on UK government. So I hope they'll be responsive. I've got Councillor Davis and Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the comments that Councillor Feake had made, that in my view, this commercial development plan, I think that's what it's called, I mean, that's key for Monmouthshire. I often feel that Monmouthshire is the land that time forgot when it comes to Wales. And we must do things for ourselves, I think. These regional things are great, and it's, it's all marvellous stuff, but Monmouthshire has got to stand out and push itself forward, I think. And that commercial development plan is one of the key issues, I feel. And Councillor Feakin has suggested, that perhaps some of our members, can have an input into the development of that plan. So perhaps I would suggest that we write to Kelly Byrne and suggest that we see it as a key issue. And if there's anything that we can do as a committee to push that forward, then obviously we would be happy to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. More than happy to do that. That's another letter on top. Councillor Becker.
It's just a point of information. They showed the metro scheme up on the wall, and Chepstow was a metro station, just in case anybody, because there's been a lot of confusion about whether we were or weren't officially. And apparently we are, according to them. So, do you know, I didn't notice. Yeah, and in terms of inviting people, we could try Ken Skates again, but he's personally refused 2 of my invitations. In fact, not even acknowledged that I've made them to come down and experience the problems that we're having. So, but we could write a letter to him as well, if you like. So.
If committee would like me to write to the Cabinet Secretary, we can certainly do that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll do that and ask him to come. We did. I know there's a group of local councillors in Chepstow did that, and he promised to come and then send an official at the very last minute saying that he couldn't come, which was a shame. But just in terms of, so that there's a number of letters there to generate some action. In terms of items for the next meeting, do we want to identify City Deal perhaps as an item for the next meeting at this stage? Because that business plan will be signed off literally in the next couple of weeks, so it'll be very, very fresh. So, yeah, Councillor Davis.
I know that's a very important strategic deal, but I do feel we need to push our own commercial development plan. So at some stage we need to address that as well, and perhaps get the officer concerned in to talk about it.
Okay. Councillor Fegans?
And also that report back on the procurement. It's nice to finish, it'd be nice to get that wrapped up and sent off in a direction, maybe, before we start looking at other items. So maybe that is sort of the top of the agenda. It depends whether
Okay.
it's obviously on there or someone else's work agenda, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, well, the two offers will be there then, the procurement plan and the economic commercial development plan. We'll make those requests to see if they can come for the next meeting then. Okay. Yeah. So just to say that the next meeting is on the 15th of March. Obviously, don't forget the seminar next Thursday on the 106. It'd be great to see as many of you there as possible. And just to reiterate, if you have got any additional views on how that should be shaped, please email Mark Hand. Can I thank you all for your contributions this morning and this afternoon, and see you next meeting. Thank you.